Hi, my name is Rose Wessel, and we're here in Covington, Massachusetts. I'm co-founder of No Frack Gas in Mass.
And I'm Katy Eisman, the director of the Massachusetts Pipeline Awareness Network, which is a coalition of organizations and groups, including No Frack Gas in Mass.
And we actually started out on Facebook, of all places. I saw a post on Facebook that was from a blog from upstate New York that had a memo from Kinder Morgan showing the scope of the project. And it was a large map of the state with a line going up through the northern part of the state. And I realized, having been interested in fracking and pipelines in general, that this meant huge impacts for our area and a huge change in character. So I repeated it with just a little phrase, said, "I'm planning on fighting this, who's with me?" And got flooded with information from all over. And a lot of it actually came from Katy as well, who I had only just known slightly from town, but turns out she has a background in law and environmental studies.
That's right. So I immediately started researching the federal preemption issues because we heard this was an interstate pipeline. To me, that said we're going to be looking at the state law being superseded by the federal law. And so I started posting on the No Frack Gas website information so that people could have a context for this.
And the website came along because we started a Facebook page when I realized there was so much information coming in. And the way Facebook is structured, it's hard to keep track of what was posted. It gets buried really quick. So I was talking by then with my friends Jane and Bruce Wynn from Berkshire Environmental Action Team. And they said, "We have web space. Do you need a site?" "Yes, please." So we put up a skeleton really fast. And Katy and I started just pouring the information in a categorized way so that we could find stuff again. Some of the stuff that I found most alarming about what was coming in was the comments from locals around here going, "Is that what those people were knocking on my door for?" And they had no idea that it was something of that scope. So when they came knocking to the door, said, "We have information about an energy project." They didn't say that it was a giant, 36-inch high-pressure gas pipeline that was covering the state. Some of them, they said, "Oh, yeah, we're doing some utility surveys," because they were, in this area, they're backed up along the high-tension power lines. So people thought they were probably from the electric company. And they saw the logo, but they had no idea. And then when they saw that memo put up, it really hit.
And in the meantime, we learned that this proposed path crosses over 100 conservation parcels, and I have connections to the land trust community, so I reached out to a variety of land trusts, and there ended up being at the Massachusetts Land Trust Coalition conference in March, a special breakout session dealing with the pipeline. And after that, I realized that there were other groups across the state that were starting to form to oppose the project and to learn more about it, and giving presentations across the state. So that's when the Massachusetts Pipeline Awareness Network started as a way to connect different types of organizations, either existing organizations or newly formed organizations, to communicate about the project.
And one of the first things that I asked was if Jane or Bruce, who were also doing research over at BEAT, if they could come and make a presentation on the pipeline here in Covington. And that was early March when we had that, and we had over 150 people show up. In a town of about 900 people, that was quite a bit. And as the question and answer session started up, I realized people were asking questions from different areas across the state. And at that point, we had actually put a resolution in place onto the town warrant to ban the pipeline. So I had that as an example, and I had some basic information sheets and other stuff for people who wanted to replicate, the little bit we'd already done in town. And I asked people, I said, "Is there anyone here from Berkshire County?" And a whole bunch of hands went up. And it said Hampshire County, and of course the bulk of hands went up because that's where we were. And then Franklin, a whole bunch more. Worcester, quite a few. Middlesex, a few of them. And I said anyone from anywhere else, and there were even 2 or 3 hands from other counties as well. And I realized we had the makings of a statewide movement here. I had printed out the sample resolution and other info materials, and it got snapped up in no time. So from then on, we made sure that we had all those startup materials available on the No Frack Gas and Mass site.
Right, and now over 30 towns and the city of Northampton, so over 30 municipalities have passed resolutions in opposition to the pipeline, most of which were based on the model from Cummington.
And some of them have also done 2 of them, like Ashfield, for instance, has one for community rights as well as a resolution to ban the pipeline. So it's sort of spreading this wave of, trying to gain autonomy as well. There's a lot of talk about community rights now too.
Right. And there's also the petition that we already had ready for the meeting in March, which now has over 12,000 signatures, and it was presented to at the State House to various officials, including the governor, after the rolling march when we got to the rally. 5 of us went in to meet with the governor, which was an interesting little meeting.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know about that meeting. Could you tell us about the meeting and the outcomes?
Sure. Well, first of all, we were told that we would have 15 minutes with the governor, so we tried to plan everything very carefully. We had 5 agenda items that would each get 3 minutes or whatever. We ended up staying for over 45 minutes. They had to drag him away, and the main thing that we got out of there was, there's a large backstory about this study that had been done by the New England State Committee on Electricity, which is this made up of the 6 New England states utilities departments, and they had a study done that has been controversial. The Conservation Law Foundation did some FOIA requests, getting information, or trying to get information. Eventually they got some from Massachusetts and the other states, in part about this study, which looked at different scenarios, or it mentions different scenarios, and looking as to whether we need more gas. And the conclusion at the end of the study was that we need more gas, even though they mentioned a possible low demand scenario under which we wouldn't need more gas. And we all said, wait, can you tell us a little bit more about this study? Because from what we had, from our research, we had seen that ISO New England, that manages the grid for the region, said with all of the energy efficiency programs that we have in place, our annual demand is actually not going up anymore. It's actually declining a little bit. So we, in a sense, feel like we are already in that low demand scenario.
And since then, you've been looking at the ISO New England calendar, which shows at least 10 to 20 times a month, there's a low consumption warning, a low demand warning. I mean, it's only a temporary dip in the system, but it basically tells the power plant, stop producing power, there's too much on the grid.
Right, so yeah, we're actually, our times we're using less than they know what to do with, and it can become a dangerous situation. And so as CLF early on realized the problem, such as it is, that the states need to address are these peak demand periods that happen in the coldest days of the winter, a few hours a day perhaps, when gas is being used for heating and is also being used by the electrical power plants, and so that's when the demand is the highest. So we've all been saying that the solution to this problem that is not year-round should not be a year-round huge pipeline that's just stuck in there forever. There are many different solutions that can solve this. I mean, right now we already have what's done right now is they use liquefied natural gas, which of course is still natural gas. It's not ideal, but it's not some new technology. It's brought in and it's stored and it's used. And we have been saying that can serve as a bridge, to the extent that we still need a bridge to get to renewable and sustainable energy infrastructure. So in any event, the governor, when we said to the governor, actually Bruce Wynn said, heard the governor say, well, you know, that study was flawed because the governor's perspective is it's flawed in that it didn't include some of the power plants that are coming offline. And so it could be an even worse situation. But we said, you know, if the study's flawed, you should perhaps do a new study. And he said, absolutely. And we said, okay.
Okay,
and
yeah,
so we,
that's
you know,
what they're doing now.
Yeah, we followed up, and we've been in communication with department heads and had some input into the scoping of this new study where we said, you know, look at all these different sorts of solutions that are out there, not just the LNG, but all of the renewables, the large scale, the small scale, and various demand side solutions, ramping up energy efficiency programs. Somebody mentioned, recently in the news, there's the possibility of more pumped storage at Northfield Mountain, which is controversial.
It is.
And so, so that wasn't mentioned in the study. And I, as soon as I saw that in the paper, I reached out to people at the Watershed Association saying, "What do you guys think about this?" Because we don't want to be pitting group against group. And so I got some input, and we have common ground in that they are also facing with that particular so-called solution. The proposal is all winter long increasing the storage instead of focusing on the specific times when it's needed. So it's a matter of, the term has been used, right sizing the solutions. So I think we can find some common ground there as well.
So one outcome of your meeting with the governor was a new study.
Yeah.
Anything else?
There was the issue of a tariff that was originally planned to pay for the pipeline, and that was something that set people's hair on end when they heard about that. We don't know how much the tariff would have been, but it would have charged all New England electricity customers extra on their electric bill to pay for the pipeline. And what it would have done was pay back the electric generation companies for the gas that they buy from the pipeline to generate electricity. There was some question about whether or not it would go through. The bill that would have allowed for that and the new transmission lines that they wanted to put from Hydro-Quebec down through, it didn't pass. And when we met with the governor, he said, if this doesn't pass, we might need to rethink the tariff. And sure enough, it didn't pass. And now it's been stalled. We don't know how long. There are a few legislators who have told us they hope indefinitely that won't even become an issue.
And so the other New England governors, particularly the governor in Maine, he's been writing these sort of open, nasty letters to Governor Patrick saying, how could you pull out of this regional agreement, and urging him to join back in. But so far, the administration has said, we're going to do the study, see what we really need, and we'll get back to you.
And what's interesting too is we've seen the reports from Kinder Morgan. They've actually filed a proposal with the state of Maine to try and get a tariff just in Maine. So now they figure, well, the regional proposal's not working, but maybe we could get it over here where, the government favors us a little more.
Yeah, Maine has been the big push behind this, as well as Connecticut is looking for increased natural gas more than the rest of the region.
So what do you see as the next step, both for your organizations, but also for the people in the Commonwealth?
Well, just this past week, Kinder Morgan filed at FERC a pre-filing request. FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and the first step for such a massive project is to ask FERC to use this pre-filing procedure, which was set up to help get out in the open what the various issues are, so that the company can have a more streamlined process when it files its official application, which would be sometime in the second half of next year. So the pre-filing process is meant to help FERC get all the issues on the table and help the company get all the issues on the table so that they can get their application approved more quickly. So that's the context. that we are now in, FERC has not yet approved this request, but I called the other day and they said they're not in the business of denying a pre-filing request. Thank you very much. And so we expect that approval to be sometime next week, or at least that's what the company has asked for by the end of this month. And then the next scheduled event would be what are called open houses that Kinder Morgan would hold across this state and along the rest of the route. They've asked for them to be in November and December in Massachusetts, and then in New York in January and February. Probably 12 across Massachusetts.
And those are interesting because instead of being just a presentation on their part, it's sort of a mingling. They put up maps, they put out information, and they talk to individuals. So it's really the first time that the public gets a chance to ask them hard questions directly in a conversational sort of setting. We're heavily encouraging people to sign up at FERC. FERC.gov is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's website. It's a public website, so you can go there, you can view any of the dockets, anything that's been filed on the docket for that project. The docket number is PF14-22, and you can look it up and see everything that's been filed for the Northeast Energy Direct Pipeline. This is also the period when, or officially the period starts at the end of September, but it's the period when you can file comments, and they're already taking comments on it. So we're asking people to send whatever they've sent to officials, voicing their opinion on the project, any of the resolutions that have been filed in their towns, so that FERC gets the idea of the amount of opposition that there already is to this project.
And there is a related project of Kinder Morgan's that goes through a small section of Massachusetts. It's called the Connecticut expansion. And a lot of people have been noticing that these projects seem somewhat arbitrarily separated, and the term is called impermissible segmentation, when you take a little piece here and get it approved, and maybe a little piece here, and next thing you know, you have a huge pipeline across the state. Although that one is adding capacity to an existing line, so it's in a different location geographically. But this bigger project also adds little pieces in Connecticut and little pieces in New York. So it seems somewhat arbitrary that they've set that apart. In any event, a lot of people over 200 people, I believe, or around 200 people commented on that docket already, which was filed at the end of July, which was opened at the end of July. And a lot of them, I think some people who've commented didn't even necessarily realize that it was separate from the project in anybody's mind. So people are commenting because they're so upset about this bigger project. And eventually the part of the federal delegation are two U.S. senators, and Senator McGovern and Congressman McGovern and Congressman Neal, and the two U.S. senators wrote a letter to FERC and filed it in that docket, supporting the Energy and Environmental Affairs Secretary's letter, or it was an opinion that she had written, asking for a lot more review than obviously the company wants, and so there's some support there. So one thing we have been encouraging people to do is to follow up both with those federal legislators and the rest of them across the state, especially if you're a constituent, and thank the ones who signed on to that letter, and reach out to all of them asking that they support Secretary Bartlett's letter that she filed in the Northeast expansion docket, because that was the very first comment that was received. I'm sure she submitted it as soon as the docket opened, a 5-page letter going on about how the Commonwealth is doing this study, looking into the need issue, and we're not sure where this gas is really going. Is it even going to stay within New England? So she raised that issue, raised a number of the environmental, the broader issues, the conservation land, and a lot of the issues. We were very pleased at that sort of opening comment there.
Yeah, we've met with her twice now. She was at the meeting with the governor, and we were at an earlier meeting with her in Boston as well. And we weren't sure, how she thought about the project in exact terms. I mean, we knew that she was concerned, but we didn't know on which side of things. But not that she's taking sides, but she's definitely keeping an eye out for the hazards involved and whether or not the pipeline is actually needed. And it was a real boost to see her voice that in that letter. And getting as many elected officials to follow suit as possible would really help. And that's another thing we're asking people to do as well, local, state, and federal.
Right, and we have, particularly in our area, we already have a lot of support from the legislators. And along the route, most of them are aware, but off of the route, there are some who really, it's not on their radar at all. And until last week, 2 weeks ago, many may not have heard of it, but there was a group of concerned citizens from Middlesex County who went to the State House, went to every single legislator's office, dropped off some literature about the pipeline and talked to whomever was available in the office, and we're now following up and trying to get constituents to follow up with all of these legislators.
Yeah, one of those pieces of literature was a great single sheet that Katy put together, sort of like the crib notes of why this pipeline's not a good idea. And then there was a 30-page research paper that was based on the presentations that Bruce and Jane and I have been giving across the state. It's called Burden of Proof, and it's on our website. Anyone can download it. It's in every legislator's hands, but if you want to download it and send it, it's there on the website. You can send it to anybody you feel is appropriate. So your local board of health is somebody to, get involved and start looking at this if they haven't already and comment on the project. Planning commissions, conservation commissions, select boards, right on up through your senators.
Could you give us your website again, please?
Yes, it's nofrackedgasinmass.org. Fracked is spelled Fracked, nofrackedgasinmass.org.
And that is a really comprehensive, sort of encyclopedic website that has a lot of information. It can be a bit overwhelming at first.
Yep. So if it's overwhelming, Katy has a site called massplan.org, and it's more pared down, but it's all the pertinent information is still there.
Yeah, but on No Frack Gas, there are obviously there's more information, and if you have trouble finding anything, you can contact us. Often we're able to direct you.
Yeah, we can point it out.
The right place.
Yeah.
I'm listening to you. We were all at the climate march in New York last weekend, and one of the things that is an ongoing chant is, "This is what democracy looks like." And listening to the two of you talk about your organizations and the outreach you're doing, from your meeting with the governor to the folks in Middlesex County getting all the information to all the legislators, and your willingness to be on this to get this information out throughout the Commonwealth to the people. I think this is also what democracy looks like.
Thanks.
Yeah, can you give us the length of the pipeline? How many landowners would be affected? How much conservation land, state forest, any statistics on that? And I know that the pipeline wouldn't be operating until 2018, and I know that Massachusetts is going so fast and so far with renewables that by the time 2018 comes about.
That's part of the quandary about need. We actually have mandates in the state to have 1,600 megawatts of solar by 2020, 2,000 megawatts of wind power by 2020. And the power plants that they say are coming offline, nominally they generate 8,300 megawatts, but they haven't been generating at full capacity for a long, long time. So when you take into account what they actually do generate, what's coming offline, other ones that are coming online, our calculations keep coming up with a bit of a surplus. And if you figure efficiency into that, there's no increased demand for electricity in the foreseeable future. ISO's own projections actually show a little bit of a dip in the future if we continue with the efficiency programs as they are. Length of the pipeline, I've heard lots of different estimates depending, this is part of that segmentation thing. What do you consider
Right.
part of this
'Cause
pipeline?
they recently added on a segment going all the way back to the fracking fields in Pennsylvania. So it's, but across the state, what are we at? There's
I heard it-
134 green fields, meaning where there's no a pipeline yet, around, like around here, just wide open space, no pipeline, nothing in the way. That's about 134 acres, 134 miles, and then 50 more co-located with existing
Pipelines.
infrastructure.
Yeah, it's around 180 from right New York, I believe, to Draycote. Or is that?
And then there are also the laterals.
Then there's lateral pipelines that are offshoots in the eastern part of the state. So it depends, the numbers depend on whether they're counting the laterals, just the transmission line greenfields, or the full transmission line from right to Draycote, or if they're including what they're calling the supply side of the pipeline, which goes to Pennsylvania. And there it's, if you add that in, it's over 400 miles, I think, altogether.
And can you talk about easements and eminent domain?
The expected easement for the transmission line part of it is a 50-foot wide permanent easement. During construction, it's actually going to be about 100 feet wide.
Wider, we've heard in some areas that it's even wider.
Yeah, where they need staging or where they need more equipment, it actually gets quite a bit wider.
And for the laterals, the easement might be somewhat, or the right-of-way might be somewhat narrower, I think. Some places 25 feet?
30 was the lowest
30,
number I
yeah.
heard, but they prefer 50 to get the equipment through.
Right.
And the trouble with easements is that there is no regulation on how far away from a building a pipeline needs to be. If you go and search the FERC website, there's nothing saying how far away it needs to be from a building. So they tend to say it won't come any closer than 25 feet because that's how much room they need to get the equipment through, which means you could have a pipeline 25 feet from your house.
But the issue of an easement versus a right-of-way that is taken by the company is an important distinction. An easement would be if you negotiate with the company and let them have have the right to use this part of property, which is still technically your property, but they have a lot of limitations that they place on it. You can't drive over it and use it and plant trees on it and that sort of thing.
And it's a one-time payment.
And it's a one-time payment that people receive for this permanent infrastructure. Also, there are helicopter surveillance that goes over the rights of way as well. So we have encouraged and are encouraging people not to negotiate. First of all, not to let Kinder Morgan surveyors on their land, not to give permission to survey, and then to say no to negotiating, because they don't want to have to go to eminent domain, really. I mean, if push comes to shove, and they do, then it's no longer your stretch of property. You don't have to pay the taxes on it. You're not liable for what happens there. So it's to your advantage to not be responsible for that. If it actually push comes to shove.
We're hoping to stop it way before it gets to that point. But yeah, in the case of it, it does relieve homeowners from all the liability of an easement. And a lot of people think, oh no, I better negotiate. I don't want to have to go to eminent domain, but it's actually in your favor.
Right. And the timeline for this is that, as I mentioned, the actual official application would not be filed until August of next year at the earliest. And then Kinder Morgan is in their aspirational timeline, they would start construction in 2017. In January, I think they've said, or
initially it was April. I don't know if it's bumped up.
Yeah, well, so towards the beginning of 2018. So about 18 months to 2 years of construction with a completion date November 2018. So that's a long ways away, as far as the other steps and other things that we should be doing to prevent it from happening.
One thing I found entertaining about the date of completion being so far away is talk about energy prices this winter. One of the things that they like to point out is, oh, see, there was this headline that energy prices are going up this winter, it's going to be costly. There won't be a pipeline by this winter. So to argue that this winter is going to be high prices is totally, it's a total grab out of thin air.
Right.
It's actually 4 years away, and in the meantime, renewables are coming online, and we don't know what the market is going to be in 4 years. There's also talk of a shale gas bubble that the market may burst, and the prices will start going up even without export coming into it.
Right, yeah, we haven't talked about export at all, and that's an important factor in these, both the endpoint of Drake-It. Drake-It is a hub that has a pipeline connecting to Canada, which right now has been bringing gas down, but they're planning to reverse it so that gas can be brought up to the coast of Canada, where there are export facilities seeking to be built to bring gas.
At least one of them has its permit, and another one is very close, and the volume of both those export terminals together is about 110% the volume of the Northeast Energy Direct Pipeline. So the more they can get up there, the larger market share they have in that. And prices overseas are 2 to 5 times as much. The Goldboro plant is planning to ship to India, Ireland, France, Spain, and Italy. And prices there in Europe run about 2 to 4% or 2 to 4 times higher, and in Asia about 3 to 5 times higher.
Right, and then there's the final lateral extension off of the pipeline in Essex County, or starting in Middlesex, going into Essex County, would connect to an existing pipeline that could then bring it down to Connecticut and New York City, and very direct, right?
Yeah.
They who knows how far it would extend, but it connects into another network to markets outside of New England.
And that actually brings in the segmentation issue with the Connecticut expansion. Is it a separate project or not? Because Connecticut expansion is there to feed down into Connecticut as well. So if both of these are feeding the same markets down in that area.
And they have two of the same companies have signed up as customers for the 2 separate projects.
Yeah.
And this is frac gas coming from Pennsylvania, and I understand that once a well, after the first year, they get the most out of it, and then it depletes very rapidly, and so these wells may not be viable. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, within a year and a half to 3 years, most wells give up about half of what they're going to in their entire lifetime. The drop-off rate in the Marcellus Shale has been far steeper than they expected. And that's actually part of what happened to the Maritimes Northeast Pipeline, which is the one leading up into Nova Scotia. There used to be a fracking field out on the ocean off the coast of Nova Scotia. It was supposed to last for 25 years, and it lasted 5 before it dried up. And because that was canceled, that pipeline's now free to reverse direction and bring gas up to Canada instead of bringing gas down from Canada. So yeah, fracking is proving to not be as productive as they expected.
Which is why they just keep drilling more and more wells, all across Pennsylvania, and want to in New York, and they're expanding the drilling. I mean, Kinder Morgan isn't involved in the drilling; they're just a transportation company, but that they are the link to the fracking fields.
Yeah.
Well, natural gas is primarily methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. It's over a 20-year time frame, 86 times as potent a greenhouse gas as carbon dioxide. That's according to a recent international...
the International Panel on Climate Change,
Right.
IPCC.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is talked about as, or natural gas is talked about as being cleaner than coal and cleaner than oil. And if you are looking at the burner tip, it is true that from a carbon dioxide perspective, it is about 50% less carbon dioxide being created from burning. But if you look at the entire transmission system and the distribution system and the gathering lines coming from the wells and all of the gas that is released directly through various leaks, then there are studies saying that it actually has a worse climate impact than coal. And just this past week, a study came out pointing out that the switch to natural gas and the abundance of natural gas is actually a problem for us because it is getting in the way of the switch to renewables. So it's having a negative impact overall, or it potentially can if we don't have really strong policies on emissions and for renewables and energy efficiency programs. If those policies aren't implemented, then the gas market just is going to, they're going to drill until it's all burned or released into the atmosphere.
And do you want to mention compressor stations?
Yeah, that's another interesting point about natural gas leaks. There's a lot of talk about leaks at the wellheads and leaks at the distribution end, but transmission lines have several facilities connected to them that leak on purpose. It's called blowdown to release pressure from the pipeline. One of them is compressor stations. Those are very large facilities that keep the gas moving through the line and keep the pressure very, very high so they can pack as much gas as possible. They burn natural gas to run, first of all. So they're emitting CO2 right there. They're also burning off the chemicals or releasing the chemicals that are still in the gas from the fracking process. For a long time, there was a myth that those chemicals don't get into transmission lines. They don't make it that far. But this spring, National Institutes of Health actually did a study that showed over 60 carcinogens, neurotoxins, and endocrine disruptors in transmission line gas. It gets burned to run the engines, and it gets blown off, just raw natural gas, methane going into the atmosphere to regulate pressure. It happens at valve stations. Those are about every 10 to 20 miles. Compressor stations are about every 40 to 60 miles. And then there are pigging facilities. That's another component of a pipeline. And that's where pipe comes up out of the ground in both directions. And one is called a pig receiver and one is called a pig launcher. A pig is a device that they stuff into the pipeline, and it acts like a squeegee to sort of scour out all the residue and condensation and so on. And there's also smart pigs, which have gauges on them that determine the condition of the pipe, if there are cracks, if there are leaks, if there's degradation to the metal. When they have to put those in, they have to release the pressure in that pig launcher segment to put the pig in there, and then they have to close it up, repressurize it, and it gets sent along its way. It comes out miles away on the other end in a pig receiver. And again, they have to let the pressure out, so they're letting natural gas out into the atmosphere again so that they can open it up and remove the pig. So between valve stations, pigging stations, and compressor stations, they're not leaks, they're intentional blowdown. And it's often not counted in the accounting of, fugitive methane emissions.
Right, so this thing that sounds so innocuous, the compression station.
Yep.
I love this, and I'd love to know who are these PR people who come up with pigs and other things like this. But basically, these are stations, these are places that invite more pollution.
Right.
And it's not simply pollution, but it's pollution of lots of toxins.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're all along the pipeline route. So wherever one of these is located, you're getting, the chemicals from the fracking fields let loose miles, hundreds of miles away. The other thing about compressor stations is they are very loud. At a distance of about 500 feet, most measurements range in the 50 to 90 decibel level. And 88 is considered hazardous by OSHA. So that gives you an idea of how loud that really is. Also at night, they're lit up bright as day. So it's a real intrusion into the areas where they're being placed.
Now, this is one area where there is an opportunity for some regulation of the siting of the compressor stations, the siting, and not so much on safety issues, which are preempted by the pipeline and hazardous materials safety regulations, but there have been some regulations that have worked for aesthetic reasons and the noise control. So that's something where local government can get involved. Another area where local government can get involved is conservation commissions. They are the only local body listed in Kinder Morgan's filings as having a required permit. There are some state permits and several federal permits, but only conservation commissions are in the position of issuing a notice of, you go through a process with a notice of intent, and there can be conditions placed by local conservation commissions, and also rules put in place. They're called 53G rules that require that can require the company to pay for consultants that the Conservation Commission hires to do impact studies. So that's something that every Conservation Commission along the route should be putting in place.
Well, thank you.
I just want to add, the compression stations I've heard are 50 to 75 acres of land.
Yeah, the one that they were proposing to either go in Conway or Deerfield, there's sort of a range where they want to place it. They said would be 50 to 75. I didn't see the acreage on the others, but they're all equally sized. They're all 4-engine compressor stations. So the new one in Canaan, New York, for instance, which is just down the road from one that they already have along the old pipelines in Chatham, just a few miles away in Canaan, they want to put a brand new one with 4 engines. The other one is
the other two
Townsend.
in Massachusetts, besides Deerfield, are proposed for Townsend and Dracut.
And I saw that on the docket that the one in Dracut is actually going to be hooked up to power lines, so that one's going to be electrically powered instead of gas powered. But the more remote ones, where there aren't necessarily high tension lines nearby, will be running off of raw natural gas.
Thank you.
Yeah.